Live.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to this in-booth presentation with myself, Yadu, and Patrick Chan.
Hey, everybody. How's it going?
Maybe
turn off the presentation first, and then we'll introduce, and then we turn that back on.
All right, let's do that.
Yeah.
Here we go.
Yeah, there you go.
So yeah, myself, Yadu, I'm a pro support specialist. We've got Patrick, who's also a pro support specialist and much older than I am. And then there is Vinay, who is also going to be monitoring the chat. And if you have any questions, you can put it into the Q&A. If it's relevant to something that we're talking about that very moment, then we'll answer it right away. If not, then we'll save it for the end of the presentation. Patrick, what do you want to say?
Yeah, hi, everybody. Thank you very much for joining our in-booth presentation today. We're talking about all mirrorless cameras in our lineup and the technology and what's good about it, that sort of thing. But as Yadu mentioned, if you look at the bottom of your screen, there's a Q&A button. If you click there, that's where you can ask the question, and we'll get to the question as soon as we can. Yeah. Without further ado, there you go.
There we go. Perfect. All right, let us begin our presentation on the mirrorless lineup for Sony.
Great. So the first thing I want to talk about is the one mount. At Sony, we're very proud of this, something we call our one mount system. So that means whether you're a amateur photographer or a professional videographer, if you're using something like our APS-C sized sensor cameras, all the way up to our professional cinema camera, our Venice, it's all using one mount. It's great for stills, for portrait, for stills, for movies, for amateurs and professionals. Right now, we have 65 E-mount lenses in our lineup, which comprise of 45 full-frame lenses, 20 APS-C lenses, and in those lenses, we have 15 G-Master lenses, and we're coming with many, many more in the future.
Perfect. And then under Sony Mirrorless, we have that 5 fundamentals. And the 5 fundamentals for me is basically when Sony thinks about mirrorless cameras, what is the focus? And so these are the 5 focus items that Sony wants to go into. We kind of already just spoke about the first one, which is lenses. So 65 native lenses, as Patrick just said, made in-house by Sony. And then also, other than the G-Master tech, there's also third-party companies that also bolster that, that library of lenses. Image quality, again, speaking to Sony being the #1 manufacturer of image sensors in the world, the other part of that is the processors, and that combination of the processor and sensor is what yields our really high image quality, with, of course, the legacy that comes from all the cinema lenses in our lineup as well. Speed normally talks about, when we talk about speed, we're talking about the frames per second. How fast can the camera shoot? I like to go into more of the autofocusing system because it's the real-time tracking capabilities of our cameras that really make us the staple. And if you know, a lot of companies, when they come out with their newest cameras, now the verbiage is always, well, is it as fast as the Sony? So that really brings us to that level of speed and performance. And in last place, I would say, not last place, but next in line is our tough cards, which again, if you compare it to the other SD cards or even the CF Express Type A cards, it's all about speed. It's all about being able to render that information and the data transfer very quickly. In terms of battery life, as many of you know that have been Sony for a long time, Sony had to go through some growing pains when it came to the W battery, especially with our full frame cameras. But now with the Z battery, that's a issue of the past. Now with the Z batteries and the long lasting battery life that our cameras have, especially when you're dealing with video, I think that it's just a non-issue anymore. And the fact that all of our cameras, you can actually plug in for direct power as well. And in last place, of course, the compact and lightweight of our gear. Cameras like the ZV-E10, cameras like the A7C, C standing for compact. Again, this is for the person that wants to have, for example, full frame quality imaging, but not have to carry around very heavy gear. And so again, trying to accommodate each person towards their needs and getting the results that they're looking for. So here in the Sony Mirrorless system, this is the history. Again, a lot to look at in here. It does show the progression of our cameras, one thing that I love to talk about when I see this slide is that Sony is listening to the customers. In this case, it's where did we start? And from version 1 to version 2, what were the improvements? From version 2 to version 3, great improvements. And it's because Sony is listening to you, the public. When you actually say, well, this camera is great, I wish they would have had this feature, or I wish it would have had this, Sony's paying attention, and then they implement those features in the next model. And that's why between models, if you kind of look through this and start looking at, even if you pick out the R series, whereas the first one, it was really just high megapixels, 36 megapixel sensor, the next 42, but adding 5-axis stabilization. The next, dual memory card slots, the Z battery. So all of these progressions as you go through the system build off of each other. Image quality and processing has always been a part of it, but that progression of we're getting better, each model that comes out is outstanding compared to the one before.
Yeah, it's an iterative process. Like I always like to talk about in this slide is Rome wasn't built in a day. Earlier in the previous slide, Yadu, you were talking about the new Z batteries. Increasing the capacity of the batteries is very important. That's one of the things that makes a camera be able to last longer. But for those people who have followed Sony from the very beginning, you know, with our very, very first models, the A7 and the A7R, our battery life wasn't something that people really enjoyed very much about our cameras, but it got better and better and better. So one thing we did, of course, is increase the capacity of the battery, which is great, but that's not the be all and end all. There's a lot of companies that have batteries the same capacity as ours, but we still had higher operational specs out there. And the reason is not just because of the capacity of battery, but also in what we've learned through all the years in power management. That's why we get better and better. We have 14, 15 new cameras now, and each one we've learned a lot from feedback from you guys, and of course by building and designing the cameras.
I think that one of the biggest challenges that I had is at that final level where you see like the Alpha 1,
Yeah.
trying to fit all of the relevant features, or kind of, you know,
Yeah.
you want to put like 1, 2, and 3 of what are the best features, but then I'm like, oh, but I'm forgetting about this feature, and oh my goodness, I have to add the 8K. And so there's just a whole bunch of things where you can just add line after line of features when you get to a camera like that. Luckily, we have a slide later on that's going to go into more detail on the Alpha 1. But yeah, it's really great to see that Sony is actually paying attention.
Too bad we only have 45 minutes. I'd love to geek out on some of the technology, but
Don't we have an hour and a half? No,
no. I wish. But yeah, as I mentioned earlier, we have a full lineup of lenses all for E-mount now. And these are all native lenses, 65 E-mount lenses. But besides the 65 E-mount lenses that we have, there's also third-party lenses that you can get, so that further increases the options that you have for our cameras. And because it's mirrorless and because it's a short flange distance, any DSLR lens or most lenses on the market can be adapted to our Sony cameras, whether it's cinema lenses or old still photo lenses. It's great. Yeah. Hey, a little trivia for you, Yadu. Do you know what the E stands for in E-mount? No? It stands for 18.
18 inches?
18 millimeters. That's the distance from the from the sensor to the flange. That's a short flange distance, 18 millimeters. That's what the E stands for.
Nice.
Learn something every day.
Again, because Sony, when they purchased Minolta, and that was the alpha mount, when the
Yeah.
E-mount came out, I said, oh, okay, they're just using E-mount because that's, you know, the cinema cameras and things like that. But yeah, I didn't even know that it was 18. Cool.
Your B alpha shows up much better on your shirt than mine. So I gotta raise it up. Okay, next slide.
All right. So I'll take you around this slide. There's a lot of information here. If you look at the very top of the slide, you'll see the focal ranges. So from 12 millimeter all the way across to 600 millimeter. And then all of the lines that have various different colors represent the zoom lenses in our lineup. And along the bottom, all of those little dots represent the actual prime lenses. And again, this is just showcasing that within the entire range of our focal lengths, we have represented various lenses that might be specifically for your needs. And I like to highlight the one right in the center where it says new, and that is the new 70 to 200 2.8 version 2, which is this lens right here.
So jealous.
Yes, indeed. I love this lens. I basically got the first hold of this lens this last past weekend, and just feeling the weight, even in comparison to the previous lens,
Hmm.
it is 1/3 lighter. But again, it's just when you hold it, you realize, oh my goodness, I can last all day with that in my kit, which was the challenge before. I shoot a lot of fashion and portraits, and when I started, I ended up getting the 70-200 version 1 because everyone else happened to have it. But after a day of shooting, that really weighs you down. So having this lens being as light as some of our prime lenses, for me, it's about the same weight as the 135. It's incredible. I think I just geeked out over that lens.
I've been holding my tongue. I want to talk a lot more about the lens design and the actuators, but I'm not going to.
But carry on.
Self-control.
Exactly. So I'm going to jump in on
The
processors.
processors, yeah.
Again, this is under that category of image quality for us. The processors is one thing. Again, if you're talking about Sony, you know that we have PlayStation, TVs, audio, and within all those things, sensors is one of the things that we manufacture, and processors is the other thing that we manufacture. And so pairing those two together, if you look at this slide and you see, okay, back in 2013 when we came out with a camera that basically did 24 megapixels at 5 frames per second, it had an Exmor sensor and a Bionz X. From there, jumping up to 2017, the A9 comes out. The Alpha 9, when that came out, it was revolutionary. And the whole point is, of course, now you're doing that 24 megapixels, but all of a sudden now you have the ability to do that at 20 frames per second with 60 calculations per second in between each shot. You're getting 3 calculations. So something as powerful as that needs the processing power to be able to handle that information, not only recording it to the memory card, but also the processing of how the camera itself functions. So you have these dual processors, one that handles the camera operation and one that handles the color, the rendering of the actual image, and also the recording to the memory card. And then finally, you see here the Alpha 1, which now ups the 50 megapixels, and it also ups the frames per second to 30 frames per second. And we will go into the next slide, the Bionz XR, which is that new system of processors. So here, new Bionz XR processor, here is up to 8 times more processing power than our previous models, improves color reproduction, natural gradations, faster autofocus and auto exposure, and face and eye detection processing. This system in the Alpha 1 represents 120 calculations per second. So this is, again, you really have to try it out for you to actually see how responsive it is and how very difficult it is to actually miss a shot, because the camera is just so powerful in dealing with the processing speed of this thing. So of course, the high speed data processing for high data rate in video as well. So not just for photographers.
For you nerds out there, it's a dual front end LSI chip, so a lot of power there. Yeah.
Now we get into the section that Patrick loves.
Yeah, the sensor tech,
technology.
the nerdy parts. The well, you know what? If the processor is the brains of the camera, then the heart of every camera really is the sensor technology. And the sensor is like you just mentioned, the A1 has that new Bionz XR processor. Well, it's the same processor that's in the A7S3, and it's the same processor that will be in the new A7 IV. So it's all the same process. The bodies are very similar. Yep, perfect. Jealous again. But yeah, the bodies are all very similar. The materials are very similar. But what differentiates every camera is the sensor, and that's what dictates what type of feature it has. So if you look at the picture right at the top left-hand corner, that's the conventional structure. That's a conventional structure of a CMOS sensor. I won't get into too much detail, unfortunately. Now, the one right to the right of that, the back illuminating structure, without getting into too much detail, that allows that CMOS sensors become much more sensitive in low light, almost double as sensitive. So that allowed us to have greater ISOs and lower noise at those high ISOs. And then last of not, if not least, is the one right below that. That's called a stacked back illuminated sensor, or a stacked BSI chip. Now, so that chip has all the light sensitivity of a back illuminated structure, but even better. But the secret to that sensor and what it does is it does everything quickly. It can output all the information from that sensor very fast, and it allows us to do a whole bunch of things like calculate autofocus much faster. It allows us to shoot pictures much faster, such as the A1 that allows us to shoot 30 frames per second, which was unheard of for a camera in previous years. 20 was amazing. 30 is just crazy, right? So as I mentioned earlier, you can see how we've progressed. We started off in 2013 with our A7 with our XMOR CMOS sensor. XMOR is actually a Sony technology as well, but I won't go into that. I wish I could. But then we progressed to higher resolution CMOS sensors, to the XMOR R, that denotes that it's a back illuminated sensor, to 42 megapixels, and finally, you can see here with even higher resolution, 61 megapixels.
And then now talking about the autofocusing system, that again is an autofocusing system, at least the phase detection part, which is actually on our sensor itself. So in the past, a lot of our cameras were contrast based. Contrast is very accurate autofocus, but it's very slow. Phase detection is less accurate, but it's much faster. And so this combination, especially in our newer cameras, is that you'll see, 759 phase detection points, 92% coverage, 425 contrast detection points. The amount of points is great. They keep adding, they're clustered together. But what I really like about it is the coverage area. Because as you know, coming from DSLRs, it doesn't matter which brand you had, you knew that that coverage area for autofocus was about 20%, which was kind of right in the center. And there was a lot of focus and recomposing that you had to do in order to make sure your autofocus points touched your subject. Whereas now, with our cameras having 92% coverage, you can be literally anywhere in the frame, as I'm showcasing right now, and it will track you. So right now, for example, I'm using the A7C, and in video, I have that little box around my eye, and I can kind of move to the corners, and it tracks me no matter where I happen to be in frame. And again, that's part of that wide coverage area. Fast and precise is the other name of the game. Again, when it comes to autofocusing, there's no point in having a camera if all of your pictures or most of your pictures are out of focus. So it needs to be fast, it needs to be accurate as well. Tracking was the #1 thing that was added as of the A7R4. And since that camera, all of our cameras have real-time tracking capabilities. And again, that adds to the performance. The next slide will be autofocus for video, and Pat will take care of that.
Yeah, that real-time focusing for me, for the A7 IV, that is the biggest improvement from the A7 III to the A7 IV, is that real-time focus. It really does quite a lot. I won't go into too much detail, but it simultaneously tracks 5 different things: your eyes, your face, your color, your pattern, your distance. It simultaneously tracks all 5 things. So if one thing disappears, you're still tracking the other 4, and et cetera, right? Yeah. Onto this slide that you see in front of him, real-time autofocus for video. We are one of the best, actually, especially when you pair that with linear drives in almost all of our lenses. You get great autofocus. If you look at the very first thing that Yadu's playing there, you can see how tenacious that eye autofocus is, especially if you're on a gimbal. Gimbals are very approachable these days. They're much more consumer friendly priced, so anybody can get a gimbal these days. But if you ever use a gimbal, you can't touch the camera. In the past, any DP worth their salt, they wouldn't be using autofocus. To be okay, any professional use manual focus. But these days, with how easy it is to use the autofocus, how effective it works, and how you can program it. Jadu's going to play the next part here. I'm going to show you exactly what I mean by how you program it. So you can first program how responsive it is. So you can either be very locked on, so if someone crosses in front of your subject, it won't change the focus. Or if you just stop right there, Jadu, oh, never mind. But or you can have it responsive. Someone crosses in front, you can change it there. Another thing too is you can change the nature of the speed of the focus. Do you want a nice dramatic pull like you're seeing right now, or do you want it quick? Like the previous example there of those mountain bikers, you'd probably want a fast autofocus transition speed. But for something like this, you may want it nice and slow to show a little, put a little drama on your video. And you can program that all in your camera very, very easily. You can actually even control autofocus with your cell phone. So for a common question I get from DPs is, hey, is autofocus pullers, is their job done? It's not done. It's just evolved now. There's going to be a future for autofocus pullers, but the nature of their job is going to be different. So as I mentioned before, that a lot of people are shooting with gimbals now, and one of the things that, of course, that the gimbals make it very, very steady. But if you're not using a gimbal, there's other things in our camera to make your video incredibly smooth. We have our 5-axis in-body stabilization, so that works with any lens, and there's also the video files can record gyro information. You can turn it on default on your camera so that the active mode's on, or even if you have it off, the camera itself will record that gyro information. You can apply stabilization afterwards. This is one of the cases where if you use native Sony lenses, the gyro information is going to be a lot more accurate and you'll see a lot more stabilization there.
So now I want to jump into the viewfinder, specifically the viewfinders for the S Mark III and also the new Alpha 1, which are 9 million dot viewfinders. When
Incredible.
they first came out with this on the A7S Mark III, I was completely blown away. Number one, it is where you see that it says switchable viewfinder magnification, 41 degrees or 33 degrees. So 41 degrees for me looks like an IMAX screen. It's big, it's bright. 33 degrees, they say that it's for people that use glasses, but even that, I love to keep it at 41 degrees because it is a big and bright. I like to check the photography if I'm zooming in to make sure that I got accurate focus. I love using the viewfinder for that. There's obviously a lot of advantages to just EVF in general, but the fact that these really high resolution viewfinders exist are just incredible. Not only that, but the frames per second at which they refresh is also another advantage. So with the Alpha 1, that now goes up until 120 to 240 frames per second refresh rate. And if you wanted to stay with that IMAX screen, then select 120 and you will stay at 41. If you go to 240, then it does drop down to the 33 degrees. The next one is media. And for this, again, staying with the A7S III, the Alpha 1, and the new A7 IV, where the introduction of the CF Express Type A cards have come in. So for some of these cameras, there might be a specific mode that you would need to go into in order to utilize the CF Express Type A or to take advantage of the speed that those cameras offer. I actually love these new cards, and even though what my use is in video centric for photography, the write speed is just so quick that when I'm shooting, even with an Alpha 1 at 50 megapixels RAW and JPEG, within 10 seconds, it's cleared the buffer, and it had like 100 images to clear, but within 10 seconds, it's done. Yeah. That's just a performance onto its own. I never run into the buffer limit. So for me, even though it's not, I would say it's not needed to jump up to the CF Express, you can do everything with the SD cards, especially in photography. But again, it's just that performance that that is just incredible for that reason. Did you have anything to say about the memory cards?
Yeah, there's only one limitation for that memory card. Like, sorry, not limitation, but there's only one mode that you required to have that, the CF Express card, which is the slow and quick mode 4K 120 10-bit 422. That's the only time you have to have that card. Other than that, the SD cards will be able to do every other mode. Yeah. So another really important part of our new mirrorless cameras is the multi-interface shoe. So not only does it allow you to put things like Jadu has a picture there of the B1M, the new microphone. It allows us to put microphones on there, flashes, even video lights, right? There's many different things that you can do on there. What's brand new actually in these new generation of our mirrorless cameras is a digital audio interface that gives you even better image quality, so you can transfer the audio from the microphone digitally to your video file without losing any additional information from an analog connection. Yeah, and sorry, one last thing too, and you don't have to go back, is that with this digital connection, with that you see in the top right hand corner, the XLR K3M allows us to have 4 channels of audio to your video file, which is amazing, right? So you can see here some examples of what you can do with that multi-interface shoe. You can put wireless microphones on there, like our new ECM W2 BT. It's kind of a mouthful, but there's actually a nomenclature reason why. It's all short from electronic condenser microphone wireless to Bluetooth. That's why it's WTBT, and all of these things are compatible with it. One of my favorite microphones to use is actually that digital shotgun microphone you see in the bottom left hand corner, that ECM B1M. So instead of a traditional shotgun that you normally see long with the dead cat on it, this one has actually 8 omnidirectional microphones, and due to our signal processing, we know which direction the sounds are coming from. We can change the pickup pattern from cardioid to omnidirectional to just shotgun in front of you. Because we use our digital technology, especially ones, we're very known for our noise canceling technology in our headphone division. We've applied that noise canceling to this microphone as well, so it's pretty crazy. Yeah.
Okay. And the next one is flash. And again, for what I do, this is something that is really important to my photography. Here, I'm actually holding up the 60RM. This is, I guess, version 1. What you're seeing in the presentation is version 2 that has just recently come out. And with this flash, the improvement is the intelligent communication of the new TTL. So as you know, TTL will get the information from the camera, from the metering system of the camera, and it will, I say, guesstimate the amount of light that it needs to, that the flash needs to produce. With now the intelligent communication, it's actually reading more things than just the metering. It's also looking at things like a backlit situation. So for example, if I was shooting a wedding and I had the flash on top of the camera, I was facing someone who's going to be walking out of a door, and outside the lighting, the ambient lighting, is much brighter than what it is inside. So typically what happens when you're walking from one lighting condition to another is the camera starts to overexpose, because it says, oh my goodness, there's just so much light, we need to either lessen the power or increase the power. And now with this intelligent communication, the flash is communicating with the camera, and the camera is saying, oh, this is a backlight scenario, keep the amount of flash consistent. So I myself like to be prepared for those situations, and I like to shoot manually. But with this new intelligent communication, I can kind of go from one lighting situation to another and know that the camera is going to compensate for what it's seeing at that moment. So now we're going to go through our current APS-C lineup. And starting with the ZV-E10, which is the new camera designed for content creation and for vlogging and things like that. But it's a powerhouse of a little camera. And then you'll see the progression of the 6100, the 6400, and the 6600. So let's go to the first camera in this lineup.
A brand new ZV-E10.
Absolutely. So this little camera, again, like I said, is a powerhouse. What I have showcased in orange is, again, something where you want to have a camera that has this kind of one-touch operation to be very easy for someone who is coming into photography, doesn't know everything, maybe wants to do the video side of it, the vlogging side of it, having things like the product showcase button, the defocus background button, the 3 capsule built-in mic, 6K down to 4K. But things that really stand out of this camera is that for its price point, it has a headphone jack. Normally at this price point, you get the microphone jack and that's it. but this one including the headphone jack so you can monitor your audio. Things like the picture profiles. This is something that's normally on a higher end APS-C camera, but they're putting it in this camera. And again, it is a video-centric camera, and we'll kind of go some of the differences between this and the 6100, for example, but it's a little powerhouse.
Yeah. I love the ZV-1, and now that the ZV-E10 came out with the interchangeable lenses and the larger sensor, it's such a win. You hit it right, the nail right on the head, Jadu. It's just easy to use. There's no muss, no fuss. The audio is great, the video is great, and the operation is very, very simple. So yeah, onto the 6100. I think one of the most common questions I get is what's the difference between the two and how do I choose? Well, if you are into vlogging or into content creation, streaming, that sort of thing, then maybe the ZV-E10 is more the camera for you. But if you're a more photocentric type of shooter, then the 6100 actually has some features that you might be more interested in. One thing, of course, is the electronic viewfinder. So if you're shooting out on vacation and it's very bright, sunny beach, LCD screens are, of course, very difficult to see in bright sunlight. So the EVF's great for using to shoot and to review your photos or videos. Also, there's a built-in pop-up flash. So it's a little bit more photocentric compared to the ZV-E10. All of our cameras, of course, are hybrid. You can do photo and video, but when you compare the two, then you can see very obviously the ZV-E10 is more video centric, right?
Yeah, and we do have the obviously 180-degree flip up screen as opposed to the ZV-E10, which is more the vlogger's desire, having the fully articulating side flip screen.
Yeah, it's all about preference, really, when it comes to the screen. What do you prefer? Sony's philosophy all in the past was always to keep that line of sight centered to the lens, right? That but you know, vloggers and videographers told us, hey, we want the one to flip to the side so we can see what we're shooting. So that's what we delivered.
Yeah, and in the case of the 6400, now for me, this is kind of the starting point in the APS-C lineup because it has that magnesium body construction. For me, again, we live in Canada, and so we're going outside in the cold. We're going outside where it might be rainy or snowy, and so I want to have a fully weather sealed and construction, the magnesium alloy body, especially because you know, people like Patrick like to drop things by accident. And
once, Jadu, once I dropped it once.
Definitely always wanting to have the protection on the camera so that it can survive your use or abuse, whatever it is that you call it. I like to baby my gear. You know, I put it padded bags and all of that kind of stuff. But I've seen a lot of photographers that you know, it's another tool for them. So they you know, haphazardly toss it down and things like that. So you definitely want something that has that construction built in, so you have that. And of course, this now has the S-Log picture profiles for video side, which the 61 didn't have. So it also has that pop-up flash as the 6100 has. But again, for me, it's about that body construction that really sets this one apart from the 6100.
I think another important thing to note on all four of these cameras that we talked about here is that we take all the information from the sensor to create the video. That's what the 6K to 4K downsample means. When you have that much information, the easiest thing for a company to do is throw that information away or just group it together, which is called line skipping and pixel binning in the industry. But we use all of that information to create your video. It's kind of like taking a 50 megapixel picture and downscaling it to 2 megapixel to put it to Facebook. If you took the original picture in 50 megapixels, you're going to get a lot more resolving power, a lot more details, and then you can create a smaller picture from that afterwards. So that's kind of what it means. Now, the 6600, of course, is our flagship APS-C sized camera. I mean, sorry. It's our flagship camera in our APS-C lineup is probably a better way to say it. The biggest difference on the 6400 for me, of course, is the addition of that Z series battery. So with the Z series battery, you're going to get a much more improved battery life. You get a much bigger grip too, so a little bit more comfortable to hold. So if you want smaller size, then the first three that we mentioned would be great. If you have a larger hands or be able to have more ergonomics for larger hands, and this grip on the 6600 you're going to really enjoy. And this was our first 6000 series actually to include that mic, the headphone jack. Why kind of Jadu and I are mentioning it is, it was for a camera this small, it was difficult to fit in a microphone jack, let alone a headphone jack. So for the ZVE10 to have both is quite amazing. And of course, the 6600 was the first one that had both at this size camera. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I
Again,
want,
yeah.
sorry, one last thing, of course, very important for all of our APC cameras is this is the model that you get the 5-axis in-body stabilization with. Sorry, Jadu, you were saying?
Yeah, I look at this camera as even the videographer. Instead of like the vlogger where you're kind of facing the camera to yourself, this is the videographer who is actually recording behind the camera to actually record. And again, all the features for me are very video centric. You know, the larger battery, again, for video, the 5-axis stabilization for video and for photos, and then the headphone and microphone jack to monitor your audio. Again, I picture a videographer using this tool behind the camera as opposed to being on camera.
So, sorry, was this you? Okay, you can go. Okay, I'll go ahead. So yeah, this is our current full frame lineup. I remember when this was 4 cameras. Now was that 7 cameras now? Oh no, yeah, 7 cameras right now is our current lineup. So you can see starting with I'm going to start from the right hand side actually. I'm going to go opposite. Starting with the A7C. So each one you can see some of our cameras actually had lettering like a C or an S and R, and the C actually stands for compact. It's our way of trying to make it. It's actually almost the same size as 6600. I always have to turn it around to make sure I'm picking up the right camera, but it's made so it's much smaller camera, much more convenient to use if you want to have a full frame camera. A7 III, of course, is our generalist, the one that's a great hybrid for whether shooting photo or video. We have a brand new A7 IV, which is beyond our general camera, and then S for sensitivity, R for resolution. And then we had the A9 series, which was speed. And last but not least, of course, we had the A1, which is the be all and end all in our lineup, one that does pretty much everything. But yeah, as I mentioned with our sensors before, every single one of these cameras here, every one that you see on the screen has a different sensor, except the 7.3 and A7C actually, but every other one has this, all the different sensors. So they all have different capabilities, right? And when you're choosing one for your specific needs, that's how you choose it based on what sensor it has and what your needs are, if that makes sense.
Actually, this is exactly the way I see it. I look at these as all different types of tools, and what are the results you're looking for is based on which tool you select to do that job. So let's get started.
Yeah.
So A7C, I know Vinay does not have a camera on, but if it was on, he would be like, let me talk about the A7C because this is probably his favorite camera, especially for wedding photographers that have to carry around a bunch of gear. The A7C, again, for compact, as Pat mentioned, has all of the internals of the A7 III with some added bonuses like the real-time tracking capabilities, the eye autofocus in video mode, no recording limit for video. This has the fast autofocusing system brought from the A7S Mark III. So there is a lot of things on this little camera that even though it's an entry-level full-frame camera, it is fully packed. And again, for the tracking capabilities of this camera, again, because of that real-time tracking and real-time IAF, whenever that person is facing camera, it's locked on. And as I mentioned, I'm actually using the A7C right now for the video feed that you're seeing of myself, and it's doing an amazing job. I have the 35 millimeter f1.8, and currently I actually have it set to f1.8. So at a very shallow depth of field, it can keep track of me without any problems. And I won't get this close to camera because I know that frightens Patrick. But again, it's the performance that you're looking for, and it is fantastic.
Yeah, imagine it's great for whether you're a hobbyist or even a professional. If you're a professional, imagine having this as a backup camera. It's nice and small. It fit in your bag. You're going to have your primary camera and your other lenses there. You don't want your backup to take up too much space or weight. So it's great, right? Yep.
The A7 III out of this entire lineup is the oldest out of the entire lineup that we talk about. But again, when this came out, it was revolutionary because it basically brought the focusing system from the Alpha 9 Mark I from that time with real-time AF And for video, it had that 6K downsampled to 4K. So this was the hybrid shooter's camera, and it was like the most back ordered camera for like 2 years. So this is the complaints that I would get going into stores is, when are we going to get more A7 III stock?
Hmm.
And it was because of that, how popular this camera was. It basically recreated the expectation of what a basic camera or an entry-level full-frame camera was
Totally
supposed to
agree.
be, because this was now a tool that professionals wanted to use. And I know so many wedding photographers who have A7 IIIs as their primary, secondary backup cameras because, again, of the performance that they have.
Yeah, it was kind of revolutionary when that camera came out. It had all the features. It had all the same internals as our flagship models, like the A9. The only thing different, of course, was a sensor. So that limited some things, but people weren't used to getting the same build quality as the top end camera, or getting the same kind of buttons or interfaces as the top end camera. So it was quite a great seller. And of course, everybody has been anticipating this new camera. Every time I talk to someone, thanks, Yadu. Every time I talk to someone or they're looking at A7 III, they're always like, when's the A7 IV coming out? Well, it's finally here. The A7 IV is a brand new developed 33 megapixel backside illuminated chip on that. Dual Beyond sensor, XR processors like we were talking about earlier. It's the same processors that we're using in the A1 and the A7S III. Fast hybrid autofocus. To me, that's one of the biggest things that they brought up from the brought to the A7 IV that wasn't in the A7 III, is that new real-time autofocus system. It's fantastic. It's the same autofocus system that's in the A1. Now the A1's still faster, of course, because it's a different sensor. It uses that stacked CMOS sensor, so it can transfer information to your lenses, and you're much faster. So it is still faster, but it has the same processor. Yeah. And one thing that the A7 IV has that no other camera lineup has at the moment is you can record animal and birds for both stills and for video. Yeah. Thanks for modeling the camera there, Yadu.
Yeah. So on to the A7S Mark III. When this camera came out, again, because I shoot mainly photos, for me, this is the low light king. So when everybody talks about this camera and say, oh, the A7S III is a video centric camera, it's a videographer's camera, it definitely is. But for me as a photographer, I love this camera, and it's because of its low light performance.
Mm-hmm.
So shooting in ambient light or low light situations, this camera is incredible for that. And for me, the 12 megapixels, again, is more than enough information to get very nice large prints. I know that right now, most customers look at 24 megapixels as kind of the standard. And so anything that's less than 24 megapixels, then they kind of dismiss it. But for myself, having shot with a lot of DSLRs that were 12 megapixels and still being able to get, you know, large prints and online, especially with social media, putting pictures out on there, I always get all the information or the resolving power that I need from those images. So for me, this was very big. But having said that, as you can see on the slide, it's all the video features. This is 4K 60, 4K 120, 10-bit color depth. This is something that was introduced with this camera, 422 color, and then 15 plus stops of dynamic range. So again, this is for video users, again, the main camera, and it is the most heavily back-ordered camera right now is the A7S Mark III.
Yeah, actually, it's the camera. Sorry, you were saying?
No, go ahead.
No, it's the camera that I'm using right now to live stream. So I have that and the 28 to 135 f4 cine lens on. So that's my setup. And in front of me, actually, I forgot to mention earlier, is that the microphone I'm using is the XLR K3M. So this is the microphone that comes with it. I've removed the dead cat. And there's just an XLR extension cable that's plugged right into my camera. So if it sounds good, that's what it's using, the XLR mic.
So this next one, the A7R Mark IV, again, this is now going in the opposite direction for the high megapixels. And again, for a photographer that I work with, who's a landscape architecture photographer, he says, if the camera has more megapixels, give it to me. This is what he wants. He wants megapixels. He wants resolving power. He wants the ability to shoot with then the ability to crop in and still showcase all the details. So something at 61 megapixels, this was the first camera to actually introduce real-time tracking capabilities. And we're talking about 10 frames per second, bringing in 61 megapixels and doing autofocus and auto exposure. Many companies, once you get up to their fastest per second shooting, will lock focus and auto exposure in order to do the burst. But in this case, it's actually doing autofocus and auto exposure at 10 frames per second and pulling in 61 megapixels of information at a time. That's really, really huge. And I just wanted to show you guys what this photograph that you're seeing on the screen right now, if we zoom into this, just to show you all the details, like you can see, I call it the hairs. You can see the hairs on this beautiful bird. This was taken at conservation area, I think in Milton is where we were. And the impressive thing is here, you can actually see the reflection in the eyeball of the clouds.
Yeah.
And that's just something that there's no way that I could have seen that when I took the photo. But the fact that it recorded that level of information, that's what's really impressive about the R series. So moving along.
For those of you that are archivists, with pixel shifting technology, you can get even more accurate colors and much higher resolution.
So this is what I consider to be my workhorse camera, the A9 II. This again is that stacked sensor design that Patrick talked about. What I like, again, shooting with the electronic shutter, you get that 20 frames per second, you get that 60 frames per second calculations of autofocus and auto exposure, and you also get that 132,000 shutter speed. So one of the reasons I like using that 32,000 shutter speeds is because if I shoot outdoors in bright sunlight and I still want to shoot wide open, all I have to do is crank up the shutter speed in order to get the proper exposure. Otherwise, I would be forced to put an ND filter on the camera. So the flexibility of what this camera is designed for, you know, Sony obviously is saying this camera is for sports, but I say this camera is incredibly good for wedding photographers, for event photographers. Patrick obviously deals with a lot of the government accounts, and there's a lot of people coming after the 9 Mark II and also the Alpha 1 for journalism, for that type of event photography as well.
For them, it's the silent shutter. So it's a lot of cameras on the market, including our lineup does silent shutter, but there's really only 2 cameras that those government shooters that you mentioned, or even unit photographers on movie sets, they will pick only the A9 II or the A1 in the entire industry. And that's because of the fast readout speed. You'll get reduced amount of banding. So you can go higher shutter speed and not get banding with the A9, and even better with the A1 now, right? It's the only cameras on market that can do that. Yeah.
And then finally, the Alpha 1, the one to rule them all. This is taking the resolution from the R series, taking the video and low light performance from the S series, taking the speed from the 9 series, and putting it all on steroids. This camera is just so powerful. And again, it would have been one thing if they would have kept the megapixels down in order to just ramp up the speed of the camera, but they said, no, we're going to increase the megapixels and we're going to ramp up the speed. And we're going to show you that our processors can handle it and be as responsive as possible for what it can actually do.
Well, when the A9 came out, everybody was shocked. A lot of people switched to Sony because of the A9 autofocus speed. So it was way faster than anything else in the market. And then we came with the A1, which is double as fast. Like, it's incredible, right? It could have been slightly faster and everybody would have been shocked. It was double as fast, which was incredible, and even more than double the resolution. So
I was
pleasantly surprised.
One of the things that I really liked about this camera is the electronic shutter flash sync. This is the first camera in the world that is able to connect electronic shutter with your flash. All other cameras you need to have in mechanical shutter. This is the first one that when I tried out this feature, again, I had to take a couple of pictures of mechanical shutter and a couple of electronic because I wanted to compare. Was there a difference in the quality? We couldn't tell the difference. And this photo shoot, the photo that you see here, I actually turned the camera around and I gave the camera to the model and I said, now you have to take a picture because you have to see what I'm seeing. And it's literally an electronic shutter is blackout free shooting, which means I'm actually seeing the light hit the subject's face. That is just remarkable. It's the experience that you're not paying attention to, and it gets you really excited. And oh my goodness, now I want to, shoot all of my photo shoots with the Alpha One because of that capability, especially when you're shooting in sync. If you are shooting mechanical shutter, now you can actually ramp up your sync speed. Normally it's about 250. Now you can go up to 400. If you switch into APS-C, you can go up to 1/500th of a second. So again, all of these improvements are based on the processor of this camera. In the A9, you had 60 calculations per second. In this camera, you have 120 calculations per second. So again, it is a beast of the camera, and we haven't even talked about the 8K capabilities of the camera. Again, there's just so many features that this camera has.
Yeah.
That for a presentation, we can just do the entire presentation on the Alpha One and be here for a long time. Even though I think we've just completely run out of time.
Yeah.
Do you have anything else to say about this camera?
I do, but I better not.
Let's continue then.
Yeah.
So in conclusion, we want to talk to you guys about Pro Support Program. So if you are a pro shooter, you do shoot Sony, then I encourage you to go to the Alpha Universe website and click on the links for Pro Support. It'll give you all of the information on how to join. Also to let you guys know of our team across Canada. So you've been seeing Patrick, myself, and Vinay. We are out of Ontario. We have Pierre out of Quebec and Eastern Canada. And then Anthony, he deals with the prairies, and Stuart in Western Canada and BC. And then Courtney Ham is our manager. And then finally, wanted to plug Alpha Universe. If you want to go there and get inspired and check out some of the content that our artisans and our collective members are doing and watch videos and educational things, definitely go there and check that out. And then finally, this is the Instagram of our team members here. So you can go there and look. On my Instagram, for example, I'll always post an image, and underneath I'll tell you what camera took it, what lens took it, the settings. If I use artificial lighting or things like that, I like to use my Instagram as, again, an educational piece for the photos that I do. And I think we are way over time. So are we going to take questions, or are we not going to take questions?
Sure. I think we got 9 minutes, right?
I have another presentation that's starting in 10 minutes, so
you can go, and then I'll stay for 9 more minutes. How's that? Was there any questions, Vinay?
Nothing came in just as of yet, but I'm keeping an eye on the chat if there's anything that comes through.
Okay, so I guess if there's no further questions, then I'd like to thank everybody for joining us today. I wish we will be in the booth, the three of us. If you have any questions, come drop by, say hi to us, and I hope you enjoyed the show. Thanks, Yadu. Great job.
Thank
we
you.
do
Thanks,
have a quick
Vinay.
question right here, actually.
Sure.
He's asking, I currently have an A7 III and mostly shoot hockey. I want to upgrade to the A7 IV. Do you think it's a good idea? When will the A9 be updated?
When would the A9? Well, I guess the A9 did get updated to the A9 Mark II. I'm guessing his question is when it's going to be upgraded from the A9 Mark II. The answer is I don't know when it will be updated. Soon only, not yet. And then the question is, what was the other question? If he should get the A7 IV? Was that the question?
Yeah. She was asking if A7 IV, do you think is a good idea?
The biggest upgrade you're going to get when you go to the A7 IV, besides the resolution, is the real-time autofocusing. It's going to be incredible for stuff like hockey. As I mentioned earlier, the real-time tracking, the crazy thing about it is it uses our general AI system on there. So it tracks 5 different things. It reads your entire scene, looks at what your subject is, determines what it is. Is it human? Is it animal? Is it bird? Is it a dog? And then once it determines, say, hey, if it's a human, then the eyes are here. I'm going to track the eyes. I'm going to track the face. I'm going to see what color their clothing are, their hair, and that sort of thing. And I'm going to track all those things. So even if I turn around, it's still tracking a bunch of other stuff at the same time. So you're never going to lose your subject. So for tracking capabilities and sorry, I can't find the word for it, but for the responsiveness and tracking, it's far better. That real-time tracking is amazing. Yeah. For that alone, I think it's a great upgrade.
Okay, if anyone has any other questions, we're going to stick around for just a couple more minutes. Feel free to engage in a conversation and ask away.
Great. Thanks for that question. For that question they asked about the A7 IV, are they taking pictures of pictures in general, or is it pictures and video? Oh, we got an alert. Oh, it's just them. I wonder if anybody else got that. The Ontario alert.
Yeah, we all got that, I think.
Yeah.
Yeah, mainly shooting hockey for that question, Pat. Also, we have a question here asking, is it good with low light
Is the camera good in low light?
for
Yeah,
both
from the
pictures and video?
Yeah, from the tests I've seen, it's actually incredible for low light. So even though it's higher resolution than the A7 Mark III, you would think that the sensitivity goes down. But what happens is with the new processor, the new dual Beyond's XR processor, that will give you much better noise production, much better processing of the photos and videos. So you're going to get higher quality that way from the image. Yeah, I think, besides me talking about the low light performance of that camera, probably the best thing I can do for you is just to direct you to YouTube. There's so many reviewers out there that had samples of this camera and done the low light test, and you can see the actual results of how good that low light was. And I think you'll be pleasantly surprised. Even the low light autofocus is actually improved compared to the A7 III as well. So if you're shooting hockey and you're in a lower light stadiums, then you're going to get better acquisition of the subject due to its more sensitive, higher sensitivity for the autofocus system as well. Yeah.
That's a good answer, Pat. We got one more here. What is
Sure.
better for reducing rolling shutter, the A7S III or the A7 IV?
That would be the A7S III. So that's a great question. I did a talk to an organization recently for a Professional Videographers Association, and there's 3 cameras that I focused on for full frame. There's A1, A7S III, and the A7 IV. So if you're talking about rolling shutter, it's the A7S III that will have less rolling shutter, and that's primarily for one reason only, and that's because it's lower resolution. The sensor, it's 12 megapixels. When you crop that to 16 by 9, you got you got close to what you need for 4K. It still got more than you need, but you oversamples that amount to 4K. Now the A7 Mark IV is 33 megapixels. We don't, as I mentioned earlier, we use all of that information to create the video. So that's a lot of information to pass from the sensor to the processor. So you will get more rolling shutter with that. On the positive side, if you're not doing a lot of motion, it actually have the highest resolving power that you can get for a full frame is with the A7 IV, because it uses all that resolution on the chip to make that 4K image. The A7 III, of course, I've just mentioned is lower, and the A1 at pixel bins, right? When you so one advantage is if you're using the A7 IV for video, you'll be able to shoot in full frame in 4K up to 30p. When you do 60, it crops in. Now, if you're shooting at 4K 24p, for example, if you only have one lens with you, say a 50mm 1.2 or new G Master, it's like having 2 lenses in one. When you can crop it down to Super 35 mode, and now that's a 75mm 1.2, right? And you'll still get 4K images. That's the advantage of having the higher resolution. But to answer your question simply, the A7S III is better for reducing rolling shutter. The best, of course, would be the A9 II and the A1. Actually, close.
Right.
Close. Yeah.
Right. And I know you love nerding out and geeking out on the technology of all the
Yeah.
sensors and lenses and everything.
Oh,
But
I wish I
think
could talk
we're
about
just
the stacks.
about yeah, I think we're just about done here, Pat. It's 1 o'clock. I think we gotta get ready for another presentation.
Yep.
But thanks so much, Pat, and thanks to everyone for asking the questions. Hope you had
Yeah,
a great
thank you.
time. All right. Hope you enjoy your day at ProFusion 2021.
Yeah. Thanks everybody for joining. Have a good day.